You're just the assistant, right? Go get me another glass of champagne." The words hit me like a slap across the face as I stood in the middle of the Malibu oceanfront terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. I was wearing my best black designer dress, the one I'd saved for months to buy, holding my tablet with the detailed timeline for what was supposed to be the most important wedding of my career. But to Victoria Ashworth, mother of the bride, I was just another member of the hired help. The scene around me was picture perfect. 200 guests in their finest attire mingled on the pristine white marble terrace of the seaside manor, crystal glasses catching the last rays of sunlight, the sound of gentle waves mixing with sophisticated laughter. White roses and peonies cascaded from every surface, and the string quartet I'd personally selected played softly near the altar I'd designed. Everything was flawless, exactly as I'd envisioned when I'd spent 3 months planning every detail of Charlotte Ashworth's dream wedding. Everything except the way her mother was treating me. In that moment, standing there with my cheeks burning from embarrassment, I felt the ground beneath this entire celebration begin to shift. The same woman who had dismissed me so casually had no idea that every flower arrangement, every perfectly timed entrance, every detail she was so smugly enjoying had been orchestrated by me. She didn't know that the company she thought she was so superior to, Platinum Weddings LA, was mine. Built from nothing, grown into the most exclusive wedding planning service on the West Coast, booked solid for the next 2 years with a waiting list that Hollywood A-listers would kill for. She was about to learn that sometimes the person you dismiss as just the assistant is actually the one holding all the power. I had arrived early that morning to oversee the final setup, just as I did for every wedding. This wasn't unusual. Charlotte's wedding was the culmination of months of planning, and with a budget of $800,000, it needed to be perfect. What I hadn't expected was to walk into a family dynamic that immediately transported me back to my days working as an actual assistant, when I was building my business from nothing, and every dismissive comment cut deep. The financial reality was something Victoria Ashworth couldn't have imagined. The check for my services, $120, euros and dollars for full wedding planning and coordination, had been signed by her ex-husband, Charlotte's father, without hesitation. He'd found me through a referral from another client, a tech billionaire whose daughter's wedding I'd planned the previous year. The Ashworth wedding represented just one of 42 weddings I'd booked that year, each one meticulously planned and flawlessly executed by my team of 12 full-time employees. The morning had started so promisingly. I'd arrived at 6 a.m. with my core team, Sarah, my lead coordinator, Miguel, our floral designer, and James, who handled all technical aspects from lighting to sound. We'd transformed the seaside manor from an elegant but empty venue into a wedding wonderland in just 4 hours. The oceanfront ceremony space featured an arch of white roses and trailing greenery that seemed to frame the Pacific Ocean perfectly, while the reception area glowed with hundreds of candles and market lights that would create magic as the sun set. I'd been adjusting the placement of the bride's bouquet when Victoria Ashworth swept onto the terrace like she owned the place. Designer from head to toe, Chanel suit, Louboutin heels, jewelry that probably cost more than most people's cars, she immediately began barking orders at anyone in sight. The florist needed to move the centerpieces 2 inches to the left. The caterers were setting up the cocktail station wrong. The musicians were too close to where people would be talking. "Excuse me," she'd said, snapping her fingers in my direction. "You need to fix this immediately. The programs are folded incorrectly, and I can see dust on some of the chairs." I'd looked down at the programs. They were folded exactly as Charlotte had requested during our planning sessions, with the ceremony details visible on the outside. The chairs were spotless. Miguel had personally wiped down each one that morning, but I'd simply nodded and said, "I'll take care of it right away, Mrs. Ashworth." That's when it started, the constant stream of demands, complaints, and corrections, all delivered with the tone of someone addressing hired help. Victoria seemed to take particular pleasure in finding fault with everything, from the temperature of the cocktails to the volume of the music. Each criticism was delivered with an air of superiority that made my teeth clench. "Where is the actual wedding planner?" she'd demanded around noon, after I'd spent 20 minutes rearranging place cards according to her latest seating chart revision. "I keep asking for the person in charge, and they send me you." "I am the wedding planner," I'd replied calmly, though my patience was wearing thin. "Emma Richardson, owner of Platinum Weddings LA. We spoke on the phone several times during the planning process." Victoria had looked me up and down dismissively. Right. Well, when will your boss arrive? I have some concerns that need to be addressed by someone with actual authority. I'd taken a deep breath, reminding myself that Charlotte was a sweet girl who deserved her perfect day, regardless of her mother's behavior. I have full authority to make any necessary adjustments, Mrs. Ashworth. What can I help you with? The afternoon had continued in this vein, with Victoria treating me like an incompetent employee while I orchestrated what was shaping up to be a flawless celebration. The ceremony had gone off perfectly. Charlotte looked radiant, the vows were heartfelt, and even the notoriously difficult Pacific breeze had cooperated. As guests moved to the cocktail reception, I should have felt the satisfaction that came with another successful event. Instead, I felt increasingly frustrated by Victoria's behavior. The breaking point came as the sun began to set, and guests were transitioning to the dinner reception. I was standing near the entrance to the dining area, tablet in hand, coordinating the smooth flow of the evening when Victoria approached with a glass of champagne and that imperious tone that had grated on me all day. "You're just the assistant, right? Go get me another glass of champagne." The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that it took my breath away. Around us, guests were admiring the transformation of the space, the ceiling draped in flowing white fabric, the tables set with my signature mix of elegant and romantic touches, the dance floor positioned perfectly to catch the ocean breeze. Everything they were enjoying, everything Victoria was taking credit for in her conversations with other guests, had been my vision, my work, my creation. I stood there for a moment, watching her expectant face, and made a decision. No more polite corrections, no more diplomatic responses. It was time for Victoria Ashworth to learn exactly who she'd been dismissing all day. "Actually, Mrs. Ashworth," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden lull of conversation around us, "I'm Emma Richardson, and I own Platinum Weddings LA. I'm not anyone's assistant." Victoria's perfectly applied smile faltered for just a moment before she let out a laugh that was meant to sound amused but came across as nervous. "Oh, please, you can't be more than 25. Companies like Platinum Weddings don't just hand over ownership to children." The comment stung because it echoed every doubt I'd faced when I'd started my business 6 years ago. I was 23 then, working as an actual assistant for an established wedding planner who treated me exactly the way Victoria was treating me now. The difference was that I'd used that treatment as motivation to build something better, something that was entirely mine. "I'm 31, I replied evenly, "and I built Platinum Weddings from the ground up. Every detail you see here tonight, from the floral arrangements to the lighting design to the menu selection, was planned and coordinated by my team under my direction." More guests were turning to listen now, drawn by the tension in Victoria's voice and my calm but firm responses. I recognized several faces from Los Angeles society, people whose own events I'd likely be planning in the coming months. The thought should have made me more diplomatic, but instead it strengthened my resolve. These people needed to see that dismissive behavior had consequences. Victoria's sister Margaret, who had been hovering nearby throughout the day making snide comments about everything from the flower choices to the menu, decided to join the conversation. "Sweetie," she said with condescending sweetness, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we'd really like to speak with someone in charge. Maybe the real owner is around somewhere." "I am the real owner," I repeated, my patience finally exhausted. "I have been since I founded the company 6 years ago. The contract for today's event is in my name, the business license is in my name, and the $120 $1 fee for my services was paid directly to my company." The mention of the fee amount caused a few eyebrows to raise among the listening guests. Victoria's face had gone slightly pale, but she rallied quickly. "That's ridiculous. No one your age could possibly run a company that charges those kinds of fees. What are you really, the coordinator's daughter? An intern?" The question hung in the air, and I felt something inside me snap. 6 years of building my reputation, of proving myself over and over again, of creating something I was genuinely proud of, and this woman was reducing me to someone's intern. I thought of my team, all of whom had witnessed various parts of this interaction throughout the day. I thought of Sarah, who had been my first hire, and had watched me grow the business from a one-woman operation to the success it was today. I thought of every bride who had trusted me with the most important day of their lives, and every client who had paid my premium fees because they valued my expertise. Mrs. Ashworth, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace. I understand this might be difficult for you to accept, but your assumptions about me are not my problem to solve. What is my problem is ensuring that your daughter has the perfect wedding she hired me to create. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Hired you? Charlotte's father may have signed the check, but I've been managing this entire process. You're just the help, and you're being incredibly inappropriate right now. The help? I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. The help who spent 3 months designing every element of this celebration? The help who coordinated with 27 different vendors to bring your daughter's vision to life? The help whose business has been featured in Vogue, Martha Stewart Weddings, and Los Angeles Magazine? Margaret laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the ocean breeze. Oh, honey, now you're just making things up. Those magazines don't feature assistants. That's when I saw him approaching from across the terrace. Father Miguel Santos, the officiant who had performed Charlotte's ceremony. Father Santos wasn't just any priest. He was the chaplain to several prominent Los Angeles families, and had become something of a celebrity himself, often featured in society magazines for officiating high-profile weddings. He'd worked with me on dozens of events over the years, and I'd personally recommended him to the Ashworth family. Emma! Father Santos called out warmly as he joined our group. Magnificent work as always. I was just telling the Hendersons about how you transformed their daughter's wedding last month. Truly spectacular. Victoria and Margaret exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the priest but confused by his familiar tone with me. I felt a surge of gratitude for his timing, though I knew he had no idea he was walking into a confrontation. Thank you, Father Santos, I replied. I'm so glad Charlotte and David were happy with the ceremony. Your homily was beautiful. It's always a pleasure working with platinum weddings, he continued, oblivious to the tension. Emma, you've outdone yourself again tonight. The way you've captured the magic of this location is remarkable. Victoria's mouth had opened slightly, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. Father Santos was not someone who would play along with a deception or mistake a coordinator for an owner. His endorsement carried weight in the circles Victoria moved in. Father, Victoria said carefully, you know Miss Richardson professionally? Know her? Father Santos smiled broadly. Emma planned my nephew's wedding 2 years ago. She's one of the most sought-after wedding planners in Los Angeles. Booked solid, too. We had to schedule around her availability today. The silence that followed was deafening. The moment of recognition that passed across Victoria's face was almost worth the entire day of condescension I'd endured. Her mouth opened and closed several times, resembling a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. Margaret looked equally stunned, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips as she processed Father Santos's words. One of the most sought-after wedding planners in Los Angeles, the priest had said, and those words seemed to echo across the terrace. I watched as several other guests moved closer, their curiosity piqued by the obvious tension and the priest's glowing endorsement. Among them, I recognized Amanda Morrison, a prominent socialite whose daughter's wedding I'd planned the previous spring, and Dr. Elizabeth Chen, whose son's reception had been featured in California Wedding Day magazine. Emma, Amanda Morrison interjected, having caught the tail end of the conversation. Is everything all right? I hope these ladies aren't trying to poach you for their next event. She laughed, clearly not sensing the undercurrent of conflict. I've been telling everyone about Sarah's wedding. Pure perfection from start to finish. Victoria's complexion had taken on a distinctly grayish tinge. You planned the Morrison wedding? She asked weakly. She certainly did, Amanda confirmed proudly. 250 guests, oceanfront in Santa Barbara, featured in 3 different magazines. Emma's waiting list is legendary. We booked her 18 months in advance. Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. Same here. The coordination for David's wedding was flawless. Emma managed everything from the traditional Chinese tea ceremony to the modern reception. Cultural sensitivity and attention to detail like nothing I've ever seen. I stood quietly, letting my client speak for me while Victoria and Margaret absorbed the reality of their mistake. The gathering crowd of guests was no longer just casually observing. They were actively participating in what had become an impromptu testimonial session. Each comment drove home the point that they had spent the entire day dismissing someone whose professional reputation preceded her in their own social circles. Mrs. Ashworth, I said finally, my voice calm and professional despite the satisfaction I felt. I believe there may have been some confusion about my role here today. As I mentioned, I'm the owner of Platinum Weddings LA, and Charlotte hired my company to plan and coordinate her wedding. But you're so young, Margaret protested weakly, as if my age somehow negated everything they'd just heard. Father Santos chuckled. Age has nothing to do with talent. Emma started her company straight out of USC's hospitality program and has built it into one of the most respected firms in the industry. She's planned weddings for tech executives, entertainment industry leaders, and several political families I could mention. The priest's words carried extra weight because of his position and his connections throughout Los Angeles society. Victoria knew this, and I could see her mentally recalculating everything that had happened throughout the day. Every dismissive comment, every condescending order, every time she'd asked to speak to someone in charge while speaking directly to the person in charge. I think, said a new voice from behind me, that we owe Emma a significant apology. I turned to see Robert Ashworth, Charlotte's father, approaching with a serious expression. Unlike his ex-wife, Robert had been nothing but respectful during our planning meetings. He was the one who had sought me out, the one who had signed the contract, and the one who had specifically requested my services based on a referral from another satisfied client. Robert, Victoria said, her voice strained, there seems to have been some confusion. The only confusion, Robert interrupted firmly, was your assumption that someone who looks young couldn't possibly be successful. Emma planned this entire celebration. She's been incredibly patient with our families, particular dynamics, and she's delivered exactly what Charlotte wanted. The circle of guests had grown larger, and I became acutely aware that this conversation was being witnessed by a significant portion of Los Angeles society. These were potential clients, referral sources, and influential members of the community I served. How I handled this moment would likely be discussed at dinner parties and social events for months to come. Mr. Ashworth is correct, I said, addressing the group, rather than Victoria specifically. There does seem to have been some confusion about my role. I'm happy to clarify that I own Platinum Weddings LA, and my team and I have been honored to coordinate Charlotte's special day. Victoria's sister Margaret made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Well, you have to admit, it's unusual for someone so young to own such a substantial business. Dr. Chen stepped forward with a slight smile. Actually, it's becoming quite common. Emma represents a new generation of entrepreneurs who are revolutionizing the hospitality industry. My husband and I were just discussing with our investment group how impressive it is to see young women building successful enterprises in traditionally male-dominated fields. The comment about investment groups and male-dominated fields was clearly pointed, and it hit its mark. Victoria's face flushed as she realized that not only had she misjudged my professional status, but she'd done so in front of people who valued exactly the kind of achievement she'd been dismissing. I think, Robert said diplomatically, we should focus on celebrating Charlotte and David's beautiful wedding. Emma has created something truly magical here tonight. As if on cue, Charlotte herself appeared at the edge of our group, radiant in her wedding gown and blissfully unaware of the drama that had been unfolding. Emma, she exclaimed, reaching for my hands. Everything is absolutely perfect. The sunset ceremony, the flowers, the way you timed everything. It's exactly like I dreamed it would be. The bride's obvious affection and gratitude provided a natural conclusion to the confrontation. Victoria couldn't very well continue challenging my credentials in front of her daughter, who was clearly thrilled with my work. The gathered guests began to disperse, offering congratulations to Charlotte and compliments about the wedding to me. As the crowd thinned, Victoria approached me with obvious reluctance. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that she had spent an entire day behaving badly towards someone she should have been courting for future events. Miss Richardson, she began stiffly, I believe there may have been some miscommunication earlier. Not miscommunication, Mrs. Ashworth, I replied evenly. Assumptions. But I understand how easy it can be to make assumptions about people. The correction was gentle but firm, making it clear that I wasn't going to pretend the day's events hadn't happened, while also offering her a graceful way to acknowledge her mistake. Victoria nodded reluctantly. Yes, well, assumptions. The wedding is beautiful. Charlotte is very happy. It wasn't quite an apology, but from someone like Victoria Ashworth, it was probably as close as I was going to get. More importantly, It was an acknowledgement that she had been wrong, delivered in front of witnesses who would undoubtedly remember this encounter. The rest of the evening proceeded without incident, though I noticed a distinct change in how the Ashworth family interacted with me. Victoria kept her distance, speaking to me only when necessary, and with a strained politeness that was almost comical compared to her earlier behavior. Margaret had disappeared entirely, presumably to avoid further embarrassment. Even Charlotte seemed to pick up on the shifted dynamics, though she remained focused on enjoying her reception. As the night progressed, I found myself in several interesting conversations with guests who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. Amanda Morrison approached me during the dinner service with a proposition I hadn't expected. "Emma, darling," she said quietly, "I hope you won't let Victoria's behavior reflect on the rest of us. My youngest daughter is getting engaged next month, and I'd love to discuss having you plan the wedding." Dr. Chen had a similar request, mentioning her niece's upcoming celebration and asking for my card. Word was spreading quickly through the reception that the young woman they'd seen being dismissed earlier was actually one of the most successful wedding planners in the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria's attempt to embarrass me had actually turned into an impromptu networking opportunity. The band had begun playing the couple's requested playlist when Father Santos found me again, this time with a more serious expression. "Emma, I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. I had no idea Mrs. Ashworth was treating you so poorly." "You have nothing to apologize for, Father," I assured him. "Your timing was actually perfect, though I have to ask, did you know what you were walking into?" He smiled sheepishly. "I suspected something was amiss when I saw the crowd gathering and the expressions on people's faces. I may spend most of my time in church, but I've been around enough society events to recognize when someone is being put in their place." "And you decided to intervene?" "I decided to tell the truth," he corrected gently. "Your work speaks for itself, Emma. Anyone who's witnessed one of your events knows the level of professionalism and artistry you bring to every celebration. If Mrs. Ashworth chose not to recognize that, the fault was hers, not yours." As the evening wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, I supervised the breakdown process with my team. Sarah, who had witnessed much of the day's drama, approached me during a quiet moment. "Boss," she said with a grin, "that was epic. The way you handled yourself when that woman kept calling you an assistant. Pure class." "It wasn't about handling myself," I replied, watching my team efficiently pack up the floral arrangements and decorative elements. "It was about standing up for what we've built here. For all of us." Miguel, overhearing the conversation, joined us with his own perspective. "You know what the best part was? When Father Santos started talking about your reputation and all those other clients chimed in. It was like watching someone realize they'd been kicking a sleeping lion." The analogy made me laugh despite my exhaustion. I prefer to think of it as a learning opportunity for everyone involved. Around midnight, as the last guests departed and the vendors finished their cleanup, Robert Ashworth approached me one final time. Charlotte and David had already left for their honeymoon suite, and Victoria had departed shortly after the cake cutting, presumably to avoid any further awkward encounters. "Emma," Robert said formally, "I owe you an apology for my ex-wife's behavior today. It was inexcusable, and I'm embarrassed that it happened at my daughter's wedding. Mr. Ashworth, you weren't responsible for her actions, and Charlotte had a perfect day, which was what mattered most." He nodded appreciatively. "She did indeed, and that's entirely due to your expertise and professionalism. I want you to know that I'll be recommending your services to anyone who asks. What you accomplished here tonight, under difficult circumstances, was remarkable." As my team finished loading the equipment truck and departed for the night, I stood alone on the now empty terrace where the confrontation had taken place hours earlier. The ocean was calm, reflecting the moonlight in gentle ripples, and the air smelled of salt and the lingering scent of roses. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, from working as an assistant and being treated like invisible help, to building a business that commanded respect throughout Los Angeles. The confrontation with Victoria had been unpleasant, but it had also been oddly validating. 6 years ago, I would have accepted her dismissive treatment and quietly endured the humiliation. Tonight, I had stood my ground and let my work speak for itself. The irony was that Victoria's behavior had actually worked in my favor. By publicly challenging my credentials in front of influential potential clients, she had inadvertently created a situation where those clients rallied to my defense. The testimonials from Amanda Morrison and Dr. Chen, Father Santos's endorsement, and Robert's public support had been worth more than any advertising I could have purchased. As I drove home through the quiet Malibu streets, I reflected on the lessons of the day. Success, I had learned, wasn't just about building a profitable business or earning recognition in industry publications. It was about creating something valuable enough that others would defend it when it was unfairly attacked. It was about conducting yourself with dignity, even when others chose not to extend you the same courtesy. 3 months later, I received an unexpected phone call that brought the story full circle. Victoria Ashworth was on the line, her voice carefully modulated to sound casual rather than desperate. "Emma, this is Victoria Ashworth, Charlotte's mother. I was calling about a potential event." I waited, saying nothing, curious to see how she would approach the conversation after our last encounter. "My younger daughter is getting engaged," she continued, "and she specifically requested platinum weddings for the celebration. She was at Charlotte's wedding and was impressed with your work." The pause before impressed spoke volumes. Clearly, her daughter had witnessed the confrontation and drawn her own conclusions about her mother's behavior. "I'd be happy to discuss the possibility," I replied professionally. "When were you thinking of having the celebration?" The consultation meeting that followed was a masterclass in subdued humility. Victoria was scrupulously polite, addressing me as Miss Richardson throughout, and asking thoughtful questions about my process and recommendations. There were no assumptions about my role, no dismissive comments about my age, and no attempts to speak over me or around me to an imaginary authority figure. As we finalized the details for her younger daughter's engagement party, a more intimate affair with 50 guests at their Bel Air estate, Victoria made an unexpected addition to our conversation. "Emma," she said as we were concluding, "I owe you an apology for my behavior at Charlotte's wedding. It was inappropriate, and I'm embarrassed by how I acted." The apology, coming months later with no audience to witness it, felt more genuine than anything she could have said at the reception. It also represented something I'd learned to value in my business: the ability to change someone's perspective through consistency and professionalism, rather than confrontation. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Ashworth," I replied simply. "I'm looking forward to working with your family again." The engagement party 6 weeks later was flawless, and Victoria's behavior was a complete reversal of her previous conduct. She introduced me to guests as Emma Richardson, owner of Platinum Weddings, and several times I overheard her praising my attention to detail and creative vision. By the end of the evening, she had recommended my services to 3 other families in attendance. The transformation was remarkable, but it also taught me something important about perception and respect in the hospitality industry. Sometimes people needed to see your worth validated by others before they could recognize it themselves. Victoria hadn't suddenly become a different person, but she had learned to see me differently, not as help to be managed, but as a professional to be respected. A year later, Platinum Weddings LA had grown to a team of 18 employees and a client waiting list that extended nearly 2 years. We'd been featured in Architectural Digest for our design work and had won the Los Angeles Wedding Planner of the Year award. More importantly, we'd created a company culture where every team member, regardless of their role, was treated with dignity and respect. The lesson from that Christmas Eve confrontation had become part of our training process for new employees. We discussed how to handle difficult clients, how to maintain professionalism in challenging situations, and how to support each other when someone tried to diminish our work or our worth. Sarah, who had been promoted to operations manager, often told new hires about the night their boss stood up to a client who tried to treat her like just the assistant. Looking back, I realized that Victoria Ashworth had actually given me a gift that night, though she certainly hadn't intended to. Her dismissive behavior had forced me to articulate my worth in a public setting, surrounded by potential clients and influential members of the community. Her assumptions had created an opportunity for others to defend my reputation and validate my work. And her ultimate recognition of her mistake had demonstrated that even the most entrenched attitudes could change when confronted with undeniable evidence. The Seaside Manor Terrace, where the confrontation had taken place, became one of my favorite venues to work with. Every time I returned there for another event, I remembered the moment when I had chosen to stand up for myself and my business rather than quietly endure disrespectful treatment. It served as a reminder that success wasn't just about what you accomplished, but about having the courage to claim credit for your accomplishments when others tried to diminish them. The wedding industry in Los Angeles was small enough that stories traveled quickly through social circles, and the tale of the young wedding planner who had been dismissed as just the assistant at her own event became something of a legend. Rather than being embarrassed by the story, I found that it often worked in my favor. Potential clients who heard it understood that I was someone who would advocate for my vision and maintain high standards, even under pressure. As I built my business and my reputation, I never forgot the lesson of that evening, that sometimes the person trying to put you in your place is actually creating an opportunity for you to claim an even higher place than you had before. Victoria Ashworth had intended to embarrass me, but instead she had given me a platform to showcase my professionalism, my expertise, and my ability to handle difficult situations with grace. The crystal champagne flute she had demanded I refill that night was eventually replaced by dozens of toasts in my honor, raised by satisfied clients who valued not just my work, but my integrity. And the assistant she had mistaken me for had evolved into a business owner who employed assistants of her own, all of whom were treated with the respect and dignity that every person deserves, regardless of their role or position. In the end, the question wasn't whether Victoria Ashworth had learned to see me differently. The real question was whether I had learned to see myself clearly enough to demand the recognition I had earned. That Christmas Eve evening had given me the answer. I had.